Hey everybody, welcome to the Standish Woodstory. Today we are going to be making a frame for this little fella that I just brought back from a trip to Costa Rica. So I just quickly drafted up a frame in Fusion 360 just to have a nice reference point to get started with. And I am going to be starting by selecting my materials for the job, which in this case is going to be using poplar wood. I really love using poplar because it's a nice straight wood and it's great for painting, though in this case I'm probably going to be applying a stain, but depending on how you treat the material, you can definitely stain this wood as well. So the very first thing I'm doing is just deciding how big I want the frame, and there's no right or wrong answer. You just really have to decide, do you want a bit of a border? Do you want your frame to be thicker or thinner? In my example, I've decided to make a border that's 4.5 centimeters wide, and it will have a 1 centimeter groove to sit on. So the first thing I'm doing is just jointing my wood, making sure it's nice and flat before setting up my saw for the first cuts. And I'm just going a little bit rough to begin with. Like, I'm getting pretty close to the final size, but not exactly. But again, I've already gone through the steps of jointing my wood, so I know it is nice and flat and ready to be cut. The next thing that I'm doing is just bringing it over to my planer and getting it to the exact thickness that I want. And once I have the right thickness that I want, I'm gonna cut them down to size. Not exactly the right size, I'm gonna leave them a bit long just because I am going to be making mitered corners. So better to leave it too long than too short. One really great trick for quickly finding the middle of any piece of wood or anything at all, you just quickly take a measuring tape and you just mark it approximately in the middle. Like, for example, I'm using the 1 right here, and then I'm flipping over the measuring tape and I am using the 1 centimeter point again on the other side. And by doing that, you can see that the middle is actually right between those 2 points. Pretty neat, eh? So now that we have the middle of our board determined, we are going to start looking at the indent that we want the frame to sit at. And in my case, I am going to be doing a 1 centimeter groove. And I have a little example here from a previous frame that I made. That one's a little bit wider, but it will show you kind of the difference between this part, which is going to be the shorter part, which is also the part that's getting cut out. So here I've gone ahead and marked that 1 centimeter, and this is now the part that we're gonna cut out on our saw. And it's nice to just kind of mark it so that you don't get confused once you get started. So now that we have our 1 centimeter marked, and we have our middle marked, we now need to set our saw blade, which should correspond to this right here. So whatever width you want your frame to be, that is what you want your saw to be as well. And right now you can see my saw is too high, so I'm gonna need to lower that quite a bit. And I would say be cautious at this point. Don't go too far, rather maybe just a little bit smaller than too much. And then you can always do a little bit of a visual reference too. So that should now be 1 centimeter in height, and when I cut that out, that will cut this part only. Now the good thing is that we're going to make it the same all the way around, so even if you're, a couple millimeters off, it's not the end of the world. Let's cut it out and see what it looks like. So there I have gone ahead and cut my 4 pieces with the same 1 centimeter groove into the board. And you definitely want to do them all at once just for that consistency. That way, if you did make a slight error, they're all the same, which is going to be key for getting great results. So now that we've cut down the middle, which is 1 centimeter,
The next thing we want to do is we want to make a second cut, and that cut is going to notch out this area right here that we marked before in order to give us the groove that we're looking for, that our backing board and ultimately our picture is going to be sitting within. So what's important when we look at these two sides is, one is the distance to the fence and the other one is the saw blade height. And it is easy to get them confused, so make sure that you do another visual before you actually cut it. But essentially what you want to do is you want to measure this distance, which is the notch, which should just be 1 centimeter because that's what you've already cut. And that's going to be your distance to the fence this way. But the more important thing now is that we don't want to go beyond this line right here. We don't want to cut into an area that we shouldn't. So we do need to adjust the saw blade height so that we only cut this square and we don't go into this piece. That we want to avoid. So you're going to want to measure that just 1/2 centimeter. Now I do have a little bit of leeway because of where the saw blade cut. So I can go just a little bit more if I want, but definitely don't go any more. It's sometimes better just to cut twice than to ruin the work that you've done. And I'm gonna make sure that my saw blade does not go above that. And it does right now, so I'm gonna have to adjust that a bit. So let's just adjust that until we get to the right level.
And now we're ready for cutting those grooves out. So let's get them all done one at a time, nice and slow, no rushing. We want to make sure that everything turns out really nicely. Perfect. And now I have all my 4 pieces. And with those all cut, it's time to start working on the backing piece of the poster. And I'm actually going to be later attaching the poster directly to this backing piece. So I'm just cutting it almost to size at this point. I'm leaving it just a hair bigger than it needs to be. And I'm just using MDF backing board and then laying out my poster kind of to size, giving a good feel for it, and marking where does it need to be cut. And now comes the fun part of the project. It's time to cut those 45-degree angles on our frame. And I'm starting by just doing the one side on all 4 pieces. That's really gonna help us do some quick measuring later on. So one of the reasons that I like to cut the backing board for the frame is because it makes it really easy when you have to cut the angles without doing a crazy amount of crazy math.
So what we do is we line it up perfectly with the backing board so that this corner right here is perfectly at the end of the corner here of the 45 miter. Okay, that's important. Now then on the other side here, this is where you still need to cut your corner. And making sure that it doesn't move, double check the bottom again. And now we're gonna take a 45 angle here, and you're going to push it against the board here so that this now forms the corner. And again, make sure that the bottom doesn't shift, that it stays exactly the same. And once it is perfect on both sides, you're gonna make your line. There we go. And that is the exact angle that you need. Now, we are missing this piece. I'm not even gonna mark it because we're gonna go over here and I'll show you how that works. So we're going to change our 45-degree device here. You could leave it this way and then just flip it over, but I really like having the line in the exact spot. And if I start moving it around, I'm always a little bit scared it's gonna shift just slightly. So I'd rather take the time now to move my angle to the other 45. So I'm just gonna raise the blade a bit to make sure I get a good connection. And then I'm gonna undo this one and we're gonna make it the 45 other way. And really it only takes a minute because that's why I didn't even bother putting this one away. I knew it's already beforehand than risk having an issue after the fact. So now, moment of truth here. I have my backing board. I have the piece that I just cut, and it fits perfectly. Excellent. Perfect. So now let's do the next one.
So now that all my frame pieces are cut, it is time for the exciting moment of gluing everything up. I absolutely love this bracket here that it's like a wrench kind of clamp, and it's great, especially because it's easy to use. You can kind of do a little bit of a dry fit before actually gluing everything up to make sure everything is fitting, and yeah, I just find it really easy to use. So I'm gonna just add some paper underneath my frame to avoid ruining my lovely workbench here. And then it's time to glue up my corners. Now, there are a lot of discussions about whether or not to put glue on just the one side or to both sides. If you search the internet, you will get many different answers on the subject. And I don't really think there's a right or wrong answer, but in my experience, I have found that if you glue just the one side, it tends to shift less. But because I'm using the type of clamp that I'm using right now, it's not too big of a deal. So in this case, I'd rather just glue both sides up and make absolutely sure that it gets all the glue that it could possibly need. And now we just need to wait at least 30 minutes and then we'll be ready to see the results. Okay, so moment of truth. Our frame is done. Or I should say it is, the glue up is done. Now we continue on to the never-ending fun of sanding. And sanding some more. And sanding even more. And continuing the sanding for a good couple hours until it is absolutely perfect and ready to be wiped down and ready for the next step. So here you see me with the backing piece that we cut earlier. And I'm just applying a generous amount of Mod Podge, which I am then going to put the frame onto the poster. Now, if you don't want to glue your poster to the board, that is absolutely fine. But I am doing this because I am not adding any glass to this frame. And if you were adding glass, that would of course be held between the glass and the frame, and you wouldn't really need to have this extra layer of protection. But I actually just really love the texture of the canvas, and I want to be able to see it. So poplar is one of those types of woods that definitely can be stained, but it does require a little bit of pre-work. So I am applying a pre-stain. This is an oil-based pre-stain because my stain that I'm using is also oil-based. And I'm just gonna apply a nice amount of this stain all the way around the frame before applying my stain. The directions do say that you should leave it on for about 20 minutes and then wipe off the excess, and then you can go right ahead and stain it at that point. It's looking pretty good, ready for the next step. And for this frame, I have chosen a black stain. Again, it is an oil-based stain. I've used this before and I've had decent results, But I must admit, when I used it this time, I ended up having to do too many coats. So I think if I was choosing black again, I would probably just go with a black paint versus a black stain. Especially because this is poplar wood and it doesn't really have a wood grain that will highlight that stain. But eventually I did get the desired results that I wanted after many coats, and I was ready to move on to hardware. And here you're seeing me just installing the top hardware for the frame. I'm pre-drilling because I definitely don't want this wood to be splitting. And then I'm just adding some simple hardware that I got off of Amazon, and I'll link to that down in the description. And the final thing that I'm doing is I'm adding these little clips that will allow me to take out the back in case I ever want to use this frame for another picture. You can also use picture frame staples, but I don't have one of those machines, and this seems to work for now. And the final step was just to add that frame in, close up the brackets, and voila, there we go. We got my pretty little friend all framed and ready to go. Thank you so much for watching this wood story, and I look forward to seeing you for the next one coming very soon.